Hey you all, this is leather or sequin. We haven't figured out who's leather or sequin, so I guess I'm leather today. And I know this is like a political news channel, but I wanted to do some philosophy videos because philosophy is my passion. And I wanted to do like a raw reaction of me reading them, but it didn't really work out. So I think this is better. I just made a PowerPoint of what I gathered from reading the Timaeus by Plato. And I chose the Timaeus because I was reading the Stanford Encyclopedia and the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I read it a lot, and I see the Timaeus mentioned whenever Plato's metaphysics come up and the Neoplatonist metaphysics come up. So I think this is really important to start with because metaphysics is important to start with. How else could we know what we ought to do in ethics if we don't know what really exists? So that's why I like metaphysics beforehand, before ethics, because ethics is really boring. I don't care about whether we should like argue about abortion or euthanasia or whatever. I care about the mystical things beyond beyond the physical world. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Timaeus, and this is a student reaction and commentary. So when I was reading it, the first thing I got from it was Plato's idea of the state. And Socrates says, and when we had given to each one that single employment and particular art which was suited to his nature, we spoke of those who were intended to be our warriors, and said that they were to be guardians of the city against attacks from within as well as from without, and to have no other employment. They were to be merciful in judging their subjects, of whom they were by nature friends, but fierce to their enemies when they came across them in battle. Okay, so I highlighted to have no other employment because I think that was very interesting. I'm familiar with Plato's Republic because I had to read a lot of it for one of my classes, but we didn't finish it. So it was really interesting that the Timaeus kind of mirrors Plato's Republic. And I was aware about the single employment that citizens had, where they were divided into different classes. But although I do like the idea of enlightened leadership, this was interesting because to have warriors for the sake of being warriors, to have a standing army in general concerns me because of what I'd read about the history behind the Second Amendment and why we had militias early on in America. Because Aristotle would say the whole constitutional setup is intended to be neither democracy nor oligarchy, but midway between the two, a polity, the members of which are those who bear arms. So this is why the founding fathers favored militias and Minutemen, because there would be no standing army that held power over the government. Because the founding fathers most likely were aware of the wars before the Italian Renaissance, and they grew up during the English Civil War. So they know that standing armies are, um, they enable tyranny. Also, we get a hint of ancient central planning from the Timaeus. We learn that Aristotle, we learn from Aristotle that Hippodamus planned a city resembling Plato's Republic, where there was a class of warriors separate from the farmers and artisans. So Aristotle objected, his objection would be the constitution proposed by Hippodamus would breed inequality and discontent. So should we have faith in the guardians? Because we're already asked to have faith in the philosopher king, in his education and training. So that's one person we have faith in. But then now there's a whole class of warriors that we're supposed to trust. We're supposed to believe that, okay, they were trained and educated not to steal, not to pillage whenever they were hungry, just like in the Italian wars. So that's a lot of people to have faith in. So is this the right course of action? Should we have an enlightened leadership? Well, someone who was influenced by Plato, St. Augustine, he would say just leave the earth to the sinners because he divided the world into, or morality, he divided morality into the law of supreme reason and temporal law. So people who were philosophers and people who were faithful to God, they would follow the law of supreme reason by their own volition because they obeyed the will of God. But people who couldn't, weren't able to, because they loved money and feared pain, their fears and loves would be used against them by the government, by the world governments, who would keep them in line by promising them a little bit of money and a little bit of property just to make sure that they didn't fight over it. And so the earthly laws were for the sinners, while the divine laws were for the faithful. So I think, if you don't support enlightened leadership, but then you don't support, mob rule, I think St. Augustine's model is the best in that situation. So, are Plato's warriors, guardians, or mercenaries? Socrates. In being thus trained, they were not to consider gold or silver or anything else to be their own private property. They were to be like hired troops, receiving pay for keeping guard from those who were protected by them. The pay was to be no more than would suffice for men of simple life. Okay, so as we can see, these guardians are not like monks. They don't grow their own food, but they have to be paid to live a simple life. So it's not clear because I haven't finished the Timaeus, but would they have to support their wives and children? Or I'm trying to think, like, how can this republic not be an oppressive tyranny with mercenaries running around? Could they make their own clothes? I don't know. This is why I don't think it seems, how can you be an intellectual, but at the same time be a committed soldier? How can you be committed to virtue, but then be also committed to war? As Yoda said, war does not make one great. Aristotle's objection would be, a king's bodyguard is composed of citizens carrying arms, a tyrants of foreign mercenaries. For those who would possess and can wield arms are in a position to decide whether the Constitution is to continue or not. And that's why during the American Revolution, the founding fathers were aware that American citizens had arms, and so therefore they had the ability to overthrow the government, and they would have the ability to do so in the future because they were armed. And I think that you can see that in Canada, where Justin Trudeau was able to seize the bank accounts of the funders of the trucker protests because he had disarmed the populace. Okay, perspective. Plato versus Aristotle. I think their differences are not necessarily metaphysical, but basically just they have different conceptions of the purpose of human beings. For Aristotle, the right to bear arms is derived from his conception of man's physical constitution and nature. So we have hands to hold swords and defend ourselves. And I think you can see this in anthropology where apes have hands and they can, hold things. But is self-defense for survival in the state of nature or for human prosperity and society? Because we know that Aristotle he was not very fond of evolutionary theory, like Empedocles is proto-evolutionary theory. So for him, self-defense and bearing arms would have to be for human progress, like humanism, like Renaissance humanism. But for Plato, it's not, because remember, as Nietzsche said, for Plato, life serves knowledge. The guardians in Plato's Republic serve virtue, but is virtue identical with the state? Because this is where the line between being a philosopher and being a, a drone of, a tyrant is blurred. On the guardians, Plato says, and they were to spend in common and to live together in the conditional practice of virtue, which was to be their sole pursuit. So their sole pursuit is virtue, but does that mean they're supposed to be completely loyal to the state? What if the state is not virtuous? Then what do they do? Or what if the people don't see the state as virtuous? Because now it seems perfectly reasonable that the majority of the people, aren't going to agree with this. So not only are you going to have to train the guardians to in short order, but also train the people to tell them, no, this is the right way, you have to stay down. Because believe me, I don't really like the whole democracy thing where, anyone can vote no matter what they know about morality. But at the same time, I don't see how you can pursue virtue and at the same time be killing or just unjustly jailing people because they don't agree. So, do we have a Marxist link to Plato? Socrates. I should like, before proceeding further, to tell you how I feel about the state which we have described. I might compare myself to a person who, on beholding beautiful animals, either created by the painter's art, or better still, alive but at rest, is seized with a desire of seeing them in motion, or engaged in some struggle or conflict to which their forms appear suited. This is my feeling about the state which we have been describing. There are conflicts which all cities undergo, and I should like to hear someone tell of our own city carrying on a struggle against her neighbors. I highlighted struggle because I know it's like a Marxist buzzword, but I'm thinking, I know after this, Socrates said poets really like they're not really good because they just imitate reality, and that's like a double crime because not only is the visible world an image of the world of the forms, but also painting is really an image of the visible world. So that's basically twice as bad. But so I'm trying to think this provides context for that later segment, but also is this like a Marxist? Can we project Marx onto this and say that the the metaphor of the struggle in the state of nature is a synthesis leading to the formation of the state? Like animals struggle against each other, like humans did in the early on, but then they form a state. So that's basically it. And I will get back to you once I'm done reading the rest because it was very long. But yeah, so that's just my raw reaction. Um, I'm a philosophy major, so I've read a lot of philosophy texts, scraps, and books, mostly scraps. But I have read a lot about Plato and Neoplatonism. So I just hope that my knowledge can contribute to your understanding if you're a student or if you're teaching philosophy, how you can improve teaching. Because I remember I hated ethics. I don't think ethics should be the first class we should learn. Because how can you know ethics if you don't know metaphysics? And also, I think ancient philosophy is super important because, as Whitehead said, and I can confirm as a student, all of Western philosophy is a footnote on Plato. And what surprised people is all these problems that we have now, most of them were already answered thousands of years ago. So yes, so it's my ambition to read more of Plato. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to my YouTube and see you next time. Bye.